Welcome to Hell is for Children, a BlogTalk Radio program for and by protective mothers, with your host, Geertje Franken. So what's a protective mother? A protective mother tries to protect her child or children from their abusive father by many means necessary. Yes, you can call in. Are you ready? Operation Expose continues.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Hell is for Children. This show is on every Saturday at noon Eastern Standard Time, and the call-in number is 347-850-1243. And I would like to start thanking Bobby Biesinger from World Integrity News Network for providing us with this platform that allows anyone who has input on the topic of protective mothers and can think along with us towards solutions to be on and have their voice heard. And today's guest is Protective Mother Jen Goodwin, and we know each other from the many Facebook groups where protective mothers brainstorm on, of course, all topics related to being a protective mom and how to tackle, for example, corruption in family courts and child protective services and ways to change the system and whatnot. So it's a great honor to have Jen on today, and let's see if I can hear her. Jen, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the show, Jen.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my great honor to have you on. And what I wanted to start with is have you share what your situation is, how many kids do you have, and how did you end up in the situation you are in today?
Okay. Well, I guess I'll start by saying that I live in Maine, which is a pretty backward state, all in all. But I have two children. I have two boys. Trey is 8, and he is in the full custody of his abuser. And I have Mason, who's 18, who has been with me throughout. And essentially what happened in a nutshell is that my kids have two different dads, and I came to full agreement with both of them at mediation that we would have shared custody and unfettered access. And my younger son, Trey, reported that he needed to be protected from his father. And I naively filed a protection order on the advice of an attorney, and that's when everything started to fall apart. And essentially what happened is, which is very typical, reports were denied, professionals were excluded, hearings were canceled, and I just got railroaded. And I guess my situation is a bit different in the sense that my son's father is a convicted murderer. He's on parole for murder right now. He beat someone to death. Yeah, he beat a man to death in front of 50 people. He's certainly beyond psychopathic, and it was, the start of this was where all of these pieces started to be put together, and the realization that my life was not what I thought it was, and my ex was not who I thought he was, came at the same time as the court is not what I thought it was, and impossible to protect children from interfamilial abuse, because I consider myself somebody with almost unlimited resources, and certainly the wherewithal to protect my child if it was possible. Finding out that it's not possible was just staggering.
How long has your youngest son been in the custody of his father?
It's been since they reversed custody temporarily 9/19/2013, and he's had sole custody. We had a 2-day hearing, June 9th and June 10th of 2014, and they held they didn't issue the order until the day after I was released from. Once I was put in jail, they arrested me on a false protection order, violation of a protection order, and then they issued the order after I was put in jail, and then kept me until after the appeal.
So let me get this straight. Your ex is basically a convicted felon, or how's this? How can he have custody of your kid if he has committed this crime? How does that work?
I really don't honestly know how it works. He is a convicted murderer. He is a violent recidivist. He has spent considerable amount of time incarcerated, and he has had 2 significant relationships, me and another woman he was married to, who have both lost their children to the children being sexually abused by him. And essentially, when I started to break it down and look at it, because I thought the same thing, how is this even possible? I looked at, the mechanisms of what it is that actually protects our children, and I can clearly point out the lack of response from the police department, and in lieu of that, an improper response from them became a horrible platform to try to protect my children. And when I tried to protect my younger child from his father, I ended up against the police department, Child Protective Services, and in turn the Attorney General's office, which with any person is considerable opposition.
It just sounds like an outrageous situation, Jen. So when your youngest son, Trey is his name, yes?
Yes.
When he told you about the abuse, you I take it you went to Child Protective Services and filed a report?
I actually didn't. I didn't even know what Child Protective Services was. I was very naive in that sense, and I went to a lawyer. That was my go-to thing that I only knew of, was to go to a lawyer. My sister is an attorney, and my brother-in-law is an attorney, and I sought advice from a lawyer. I knew it was going to be an uphill battle because my ex is very popular in my town, and he has a lot of pull with the police department, etc. And apparently everyone else had experience with this besides me. I did report it to the police inadvertently. I called them because my ex was threatening me and my son, and as we know, he beat someone to death for no reason. So I knew that the danger was great, and when I called the police, they didn't take me seriously. They didn't even respond to my emergency calls, and they called Child Protective Services, and Child Protective Services in turn called my mom, who was looking after my kids. When I went to the police station to report it, and they said that they were coming to interview my kids and to not tell me about it. So I immediately called Child Protective Services and told them no, they weren't coming. And after what had happened with the police, which was basically they lured me into the station to report the situation, and I did, and they told me I was a liar and that it was a custody battle and all these crazy things. And so I said based on that I didn't want their help or whatnot, and that apparently is not the answer that you give Child Protective Services.
That's ridiculous because Child Protective Services should at that point have said, like, wait a minute, the father has a rap sheet from here to Tokyo. We have to take a look at this, and we have to protect this child and this mother, you would think.
Right, you would think. Yep. And what happened was not only did Child Protective Services not do a proper investigation or do anything effective in this case, they also took a firm stance with the abuser against me. In fact, when I filed the protection order, his attorney, opposing counsel, filed to dismiss, and we had a hearing within 48 hours, and Child Protective Services worker was going to testify against me or for my ex in that hearing, which is just astounding. I mean, this is
outrageous.
And he's 6'2", 260 pounds, so it's like he's just a really, really big guy. He looks like a violent recidivist. He's so psychopathic that it's palpable, and which obviously, you know, something that I go over in my mind about how I missed it. But that said, I'm not a professional or a clinician or a social worker who should be trained in the basic, 5 risk factors for abuse. And he's also a severe substance abuser, which goes unchecked by his probation officer. And it just makes for an incredibly dangerous situation.
So here you are in court with your ex and CPS, and what the judge is not saying, well, Mr. So-and-so, you have a rap sheet, and this doesn't look very good, and your child is now reporting abuse, so I'm sorry, but we have to put you on supervised visitation. That's not what happened, right?
Well, what happened is when we first went to the first hearing to dismiss, my attorney and his attorney agreed to dissolve the protection order in lieu of amending custody, giving me sole custody, no visit to him.
Perfect.
And, right. So, except we had already had our final order come down for our parental rights and responsibilities. So instead of, which is exactly what I thought, okay, perfect. Just protect my son and we'll move forward with the rest of the details. Except what happened is that opened up my family matter again. So it truly did become the custody battle that he said it was, instead of protecting my child, which was obviously most relevant to me. In fact, they initially gave me full custody, and then in the same hearing, they appointed a GAL who had represented...
It's a guardian ad litem, just for the listeners who don't know what a GAL is. Yes, go on.
He was an attorney who had represented me against my older son's father in a protection from abuse hearing in 2004 when he was the representative for the local domestic violence group, and opposing counsel was opposing counsel in this case. So I immediately asked for him to be recused, meaning taken off the case, and he wasn't, but he didn't ever do any investigation. He never even considered that my son was being abused, and he forced supervised visits, and they ordered one supervised visit, and then the next visit was unsupervised, and that landed my son in the emergency room for injury from the abuse immediately.
Oh, my God. So what was CPS doing at this point? They're just letting this all go down?
Yeah. In fact, there's a class action lawsuit right now in my state against my particular county office because on the same grounds, failure to protect, because they're just completely inept.
This is beyond inept. They're just not doing anything. That's like non-existence as far as I'm concerned, right?
Correct. Yeah. When he filed 4 frivolous protection from abuse cases against me, and once I got my lawyers out of the way, I realized how to effectively stop those orders, which was filing a motion to dismiss and then filing an affirmative defense. And it creates the opportunity for these hearings to be heard on versus the ex parte granting of the protection orders. And that's where I would say I lost, was in the procedural abuse. They offered me no due process. There was supposed to be a protection from abuse hearing on his 4th protection order, which he had taken out and dissolved the first 4. And the one that was standing was supposed to be heard in court on the 6th and 7th of June before our final hearing, which was the 9th and 10th, which would have negated the hearing completely. And it was postponed and incorporated in my final hearing. So when I went to my final hearing, I had no attorney, no witnesses, no evidence, no nothing, but I cross-examined opposing counsel's witnesses, who were the guardian ad litem and also the child protective services worker.
How come you didn't have an attorney at this point?
Because I realized that they weren't helping me.
Okay. Right. So you're in there alone, and you are the one cross-examining opposing counsel without an attorney. My goodness. What happened?
It was intense. It was 2 days, and when I first showed up in court, they were shocked. The judge said, "Miss Goodwin, what are you doing here? You don't have any witnesses or evidence to submit." And he was trying to threaten me to not participate, and he said, "You're going to have to testify." And I said, "Oh, I'm prepared to testify." And he said, "You don't have witnesses." And I said, "I'll cross-examine opposing counsel's witnesses." And he said, "Okay, but you have to testify," which is not true. You don't have to testify against yourself. You can plead the 5th. But I said, "That's fine. I'm prepared to." And then he furthered with, "Well, opposing counsel is going to cross-examine you." And so I said, "And then I redirect myself?" So he started to realize soon that I was ready to do whatever it took to fight for my child, regardless of what was stacked against me. And after a 2-day hearing, when the child protective services worker got on the stand, I asked her what the 5 risk factors were for abuse, and she said she couldn't name them. It was just ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous.
So the thing is that you're in this hearing, and your ex has accused you of being a danger to Trey, basically. He's turned the whole thing around on you.
Right. And Child Protective Services substantiated me for seeking treatment for injury from abuse that doesn't exist, because the unfettered access that my ex had to my child was he was bringing him home to me 4 nights a week with fresh injury, and I had no choice but to take him to the hospital because he had such severe injury. And Child Protective Services refused to properly investigate the situation, and they got a call from the police that when the second hospital reported gross sexual assault by my ex against my little guy, instead of taking action, the police took action against me. And this was the second time that they had completely ignored a hospital's report of gross sexual assault. And it was just absolutely staggering. I mean, it never became even understandable in any concept. It was just absolutely terrifying. And, I mean, opposing counsel tried to punch me in the courtroom.
What?
And, yeah, it was just, they're not used to opposition. They're not used to people standing up against them. And I was trying really hard not to embarrass the witnesses because they were so poorly, their arguments were so poor, and it was just absolutely ridiculous. The only defense that they had was that I was crazy, which ironically I had thoroughly vetted that I wasn't crazy because of my past and just being self-reflective. I had had a psych eval in 2006 voluntarily by the top psychiatrist in the country and had my brain scanned. So I knew going into it that they couldn't prove that I was crazy. So they tried to force me into psych evals, and I refused them because I had learned from other protective parents that had gone before me, notably Dr. Lori Handrahan from Maine, who pointed out that there was a specific psychologist in Maine who was terminating parental rights with bad psych evals. So they tried everything they could to get me to take a psych eval, and they wanted me to go to this Dr. Chabikoff, and I refused, and because no one was investigating anything. It wasn't about me. It was about my child. And no one even talked to him or, did anything to protect him. So there was no way I was going to sign on to anything that they were trying to get me to do voluntarily. So in the end, they used the protection order as a means to get me into jail, which I had never been arrested or in trouble with the law at all. And I was speaking to my son on the phone, and my ex disconnected the call, and I sent him a text, and I was then arrested and brought immediately to jail. The police, for the second time, forcefully entered my home and dragged me out.
On what grounds, though? On sending your ex a text?
Yes, they said it was a violation of a protection order.
Oh, my God.
And then they put me in jail. They brought me to jail, which is a first offense misdemeanor, put me in jail for 40 days, left me there. I had no opportunity for bail. I had a criminal defender retained. They wouldn't allow me to speak to my lawyer. And after 40 days, they came and brought me to the psychiatric hospital. And I was declared incompetent to stand trial because they said that I couldn't get along with lawyers. That was their feeble excuse.
This is outrageous.
Isn't it?
Wow.
It was so outrageous. They couldn't even tell me that with a straight face. When I went to the psychiatric hospital, they said, "Do you know where you are?" And I said, "Yes, I'm at Riverview Psychiatric Hospital." And they said, "Do you know why you're here?" And I said, "Yes, judicial malfeasance."
And you have a report from 2006, that there's nothing wrong with you, that you had your brain scanned, and here you are in a mental hospital while your ex, who is a murderer, has your child.
Right.
This is an outrageous situation, Jen. And I'm so sorry you've had to go through that. 40 days in jail.
Oh, that was the most unbelievable, most psychologically tormenting experience of my life.
What was that like? Tell the audience what that was like.
Oh, it was unheard of. I had been in such a race against the clock, in such a state of panic, to try to protect my child with no one listening to me, no one acting appropriately, just the most unbelievable situation. And then to know that you're the only person fighting for your child and to find yourself in jail with no opportunity to even use the phone or contact anyone and not having anyone on the outside who was responsive in any effective way was just, it was paralyzing. I mean, when I would, close my eyes to go to sleep, I would go into a panic attack because it was just so traumatic. All of the past 2 years of all the things that had happened were just right on the front of my mind, and it was just a huge lesson in acceptance and patience and survival, really.
How come no lawyer helped you at this point?
Because they appointed a lawyer who I didn't want, and that was the whole thing. I mean, she came in as lawyer of the day, and at my arraignment, she said to the judge in the video hearing, she said, I think what we have here is a Title 13, meaning that I was incompetent to stand trial. And the judge was from the courthouse from my county, and I had just submitted to him a 13-page affidavit as my affirmative defense, so he knew that I was more than competent, and he refused to sign the papers committing me. So that lawyer went over his head and found somebody that would sign the paper without any hearing or any evidence to prove that I was crazy, just based on what the district attorney said and what the police said. And I still don't know. She won't provide me with my case or anything, but I had asked her how she even got any releases to speak to anyone or how she became involved in my case. But I basically told her that she wasn't my lawyer. We didn't have a contract. We didn't have an implied contract. I didn't even know her, and I didn't need her. I needed my attorney. And she just ignored it and left me there, didn't respond to a phone call or an email or anything the whole time I was there.
And you were not allowed to call were you allowed to call anyone else?
But I didn't have any phone numbers with me, and I had you could only collect calls. And the jail that I was in, it was just a county jail, and they didn't have any place for the violent women, so the whole pod was in lockdown for like 22 hours at a time, and we were let out only for meals. So the timing to use the phone was just extremely difficult, and I just couldn't get anyone to take this seriously, and that was a big part of my problem, was that I just didn't have a lot of support from friends and family.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. You should have had help at that point, someone calling in your attorney and having you bailed out. And this, wow, my God.
Yeah, they denied me bail, and I just couldn't understand. I knew that it was absolute corruption because I had never been in a situation like that, but I had heard of different people, getting bail and such. I knew that it was just, that they were forcing the issue and trying to prove their point. I think it's also important to note that my guardian ad litem withdrew because I told him under no uncertain terms that this was all his responsibility and that, I was going to hold him accountable for his actions and that I certainly was not going to pay him for not doing his job, and he withdrew.
I mean, all of these people need to be sued. When I'm hearing your story, Seriously, and I mean, the same, of course, in my story. All our stories are, in that sense, the same. But I think your story is very serious in regards to the fact that your ex is a convicted murderer. I mean,
Right.
that should just be enough right there to have him only on supervised visitation. I mean, you know.
Yeah. I can't even imagine what anyone was thinking, except I'm pretty sure that they are recipients of a fund called Ex-Prisoners as Fathers, which is a stipend.
What's that?
That's a stipend through the federal funding through Department of Health and Human Services, which supposedly is to award courts for giving custody to ex-prisoners as like a rehabilitative process.
Okay, so here we have these convicted felons coming out of jail, and they now get federal funding to go after mothers, the mothers of their children, to get custody of their kids?
Yes. Yeah,
this is how outrageous.
Yeah, it is. This is how I met Barry Goldstein, because he had written an article about the Jeremy Kaminsky who had committed the Pettit murders in Connecticut. And, you know, he was given sole custody of his child, and then he went out and committed the Pettit murders. And I said to Barry Goldstein in an email, why are these judges doing this?
And now let's, for the audience, just to clarify for the audience, Barry Goldstein is an attorney, or was an attorney. He's retired now. And he is also a child's rights activist and advocate, correct?
Correct, an author.
And an author, yes.
Yeah, and he writes a lot about protective mom struggles, and it was interesting to hear his perspective because he's a non-victim, and he's also an attorney. And at the time, I just couldn't believe what was happening to me. I never, ever considered that I would lose custody, and I never considered any of the things that happened to me, especially in the punitive measures. I mean, it's one thing to fail to protect, but to step in and become adversarial to a mother who is simply trying to protect her child, in my opinion, is just, it's staggering.
I'm also really confused about the hospital that, you took your son to the hospital because he came back from the visits or from his father with fresh marks on his body. And so what is this doctor in the hospital? Why aren't they calling Child Protective Services?
Well, they did. That's the problem is it's a very incestuous mix with Child Protective Services, the District Attorney's Office, and police, because the police department and Child Protective Services are represented by the District Attorney's Office. A lot of people don't realize that. And
no, I didn't know that either. Oh.
Yeah. When I called the District Attorney's Office and the Attorney General to complain about my situation and just, in utter despair, they said, well, we're the attorney of Child Protective Services, so what do you want from us? And in that sense, then I realized that I was alone in this battle, and it was just absolutely staggering. But it was really scary to go to the mental institution because they weren't. A lot of times people will go, and I think it's important to point out too, I wasn't just at the psychiatric institution, which is frightening enough. I was in the forensic ward, which is the criminals who are convicted of crimes, who are criminally insane. And it was a co-ed unit. I was the only female there, and these men had been incarcerated for extended periods of time. there was no opportunity for me to, like, lock my door or have any sort of protection whatsoever from the ward. And I had no true idea about mental illness and how, people's minds can, hold them prisoner and that type of thing. But Child Protective Services was the ultimate fail, in my opinion, in this case, because, and I found out later that according to their own manual in the Child Welfare Information Gateway, that they point blank come out and say that they are not competent to conduct interfamilial sexual abuse investigations, and that only in areas where they have the most coordinated efforts among agencies does it actually become productive, and that their short-term crisis response agency, which interfamilial abuse is certainly not a short-term crisis issue, but it's just my whole thinking was just absolutely blown on how we tell our children to tell a trusted adult, and then to find out there isn't one is just staggering.
Yeah, because I cannot even imagine what your son has gone through and how how is he trying to make sense of this? Do you still have contact with him?
I don't. According to the order that they wrote in June 26th of 2014, I had to have evaluations by a main provider, and once that was done, I could have a year of supervised visits, which I refused to do. And I've since gone and gotten recent evaluations from a doctor in New York City, but I tried to find a main provider, and there just isn't one. They absolutely won't touch these cases. There's one provider that will do a psychological evaluation, and she's the one who TPRs people. So,
but you already had a psychological evaluation. You had a psychiatric evaluation and a brain scan. So why would you even have to do that again?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. Is they wanted their clinician that they knew would, say things that were open to interpretation and that they could manipulate. I mean, in the end, when you think about it, people who are crazy have every right to their children. This should not even become a defense for any protective parent. Because someone's crazy.
Yes, go ahead.
That's just a horrible thing, because people that have challenges with their mental health have every opportunity to access their children, and it just shouldn't even become a question of whether or not the mother is crazy.
Well, it's not even that. You had every evidence already on the table that there was nothing wrong with you, and if I'm listening to your story, and if I put my own knowledge aside of what actually goes on in American court, for any person listening who doesn't know anything about this would agree with me that in the first hearing about all of this, it should have been decided that you would have had full custody and the father should have been on supervised visitation only until your son was 18, because here you have records showing that there's nothing wrong with you, and here you have records showing that your ex is a convicted murderer. It's
Right.
that clear cut, and the fact that you got railroaded makes me wonder, and I'm sure all the listeners are wondering as well. Like, okay, so somewhere along the line, these folks in family court and CPS and the Attorney General's office and the whole good old boys network were, paid off, or there must have been some kind of financial incentive for them to do this, wouldn't you think?
Right.
I mean, what's the reason for all of this?
Right. Well, that was what propelled my search into why would they do this? Why would they? What there must be benefit, because they were. When I was taking my son to clinicians and doctors and such, he was. They were putting their professional lives on the line, and I couldn't understand why they would be doing that. So I started to look into it, look into the different funding from the court, and that's when I found out that the courts are actually incentivized to give sole custody to one parent, and then they receive funding, which is a match of child support payments, which is, depending on this exact situation, either 66% or 300% match on every dollar that is paid in child support. So I quickly understood that they had price tags on my child's head.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that Child Protective Services even had to say about the situation, I'm embarrassed for them that they even put down on paper what they had to say, because they said that I was severely emotionally abusing my child by seeking treatment for injury from abuse that doesn't exist. And they said that I was moderately abusing emotionally my older son by creating in him and instilling in him a fear of the system, which is an absolute joke.
It's like, okay, so you go and you file charges, you talk about my son is being abused, and here you are made out to be the abuser simply because you are reporting the abuse.
Right. Yep. That's exactly how it happened.
And then if you're saying that, then they say, well, you're crazy, so we're going to just lock you up for 40 days and then toss you into a mental institution because the fact that you are reporting abuse is crazy.
Right. And they were severely disappointed when the evaluation came back saying that I was bright, articulate, resourceful, and managing well under the circumstances. So it didn't go their way in the end, but the options for recourse for me were very limited. I couldn't get any attorney to help me with my case. In fact, I offered an attorney $10,000 just to take my case on as a sign-on bonus, and they wouldn't even touch it. So that's when I knew that there was not going to be any help from the legal standpoint. And I talked to over 100 attorneys, and they all said the same thing. You face considerable opposition, which proved to be true.
Yeah, but it makes them a lame bunch for saying, well, that's too hard to tackle, so we're not going to take it. I mean, what's that about?
Right. And if the laws were applied as they're written, I certainly would have won my case, even despite the opposition, because I had studied enough about the law that I could effectively litigate my own 2-day trial. And I proved all my points. I did have one witness, my mom, who was present for a lot of the hospital visits and stuff like that. And I more than proved my case. They brought on the principal of the school who my son had reported the abuse to. He reported to his guidance counselor, his teacher, and his principal, and they ignored him. They told me that they told him that he's safe at school and what happens at home stays at home. It was just ridiculous. I mean, I asked, opposing counsel got the principal to say that she had followed all of the laws around child abuse, and I quickly pointed out that she didn't even know what they were. It was as simple as it needed to be. And the guardian ad litem, who I had to ask the judge in what capacity he was testifying, because he was an attorney, but he also had withdrawn from my case effectively. So I didn't even know what capacity he was testifying in. He wasn't the guardian ad litem. And I asked him what his experience was with children or what his training was, and he testified that he has no experience with kids at all, no training, and he doesn't even know any kids.
Oh, my God. This is just like a most surreal situation you could ever find yourself in.
Right. Yeah, it really is. It's just unimaginable. And I live in a very small town. I've since moved from that county, but to lose custody to an abuser, to a convicted murderer, the stigma around that and the judgment is just unbelievable. And with someone who's as psychopathic as my ex, he presents as Father of the Year. So he became the football coach, which, as you know,
sounds like a Sandusky case or something, you know?
You're absolutely right. And I mean, it's just, again, the failure of the York Police Department has been epic in scope and depth. It's just been truly, truly unreal. And what we find is that, trying to hold them accountable is extremely difficult, but exposing them is much more simple, especially with a case that's so cut and dry as mine.
It's a great point, and I was just going to ask you about this. Have you tried to contact the media about your case?
Yes and no. I have tried somewhat, but not effectively. I haven't gotten anyone that would actually publish the details, because there are so many powerful people who put their professional lives on the line, and nobody wants to go against my opposition, which really speaks to me in the sense of, well, if you don't even want to go against my opposition, why would you leave my child with this man?
That's a great point. Because basically what you're saying is the media is in the pockets of the Attorney General and CPS and the Family Court and all these characters in this circus, and they're afraid to touch it because of that. But at the same time, your son has to go and grow up in that environment.
Right. So frustrating and staggering, and every single thing that can be brought up about how not to handle these cases has happened. Like, he used the protection orders as a way to gain an advantage with the custody, and that was apparent from the get-go. And the collusion with the guardian ad litem and opposing counsel was obvious, and the lack of action, and then the proactive action that the police and Child Protective Services took against me was just absolutely ridiculous.
Have you tried to appeal all of this?
They held me in jail until after my appeal.
Okay, because you have to appeal within 30 days after the hearing. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, and they issued the order 30 days after the hearing. They issued the order the day after they put me in jail.
Wow. So they basically detained you. They detained you to prevent you from appealing the case.
Yep.
And what can you do now then?
Well, that's the $1 million question. Obviously, I suffer so much from legal abuse syndrome. I have a really difficult time, even approaching the subject of going back to court. But what I have decided as an angle is to capitalize on the failure of Child Protective Services. And it seems to me that the universe is lining up to create opportunity for me here, because there's a massive class action lawsuit against the very people who failed my son. So I'm going to go after Child Protective Services, and in my claim, I'm asking them to remove the substantiation against me and correct their error, because I think, number one, they're certainly responsible, and number two, they have they have the ultimate say. They're the only ones that the court will listen to, and based on the information that I have, my case is very succinct. It reads just as I speak it to you. It's really mind-blowing. So I'm going to petition the court to, correct Child Protective Services with their error.
Yeah, and I would sue them, and I would sue them for financial damages too, not just emotional damages to you and your son, but also, to get. I mean, your life is shattered as a result of this, and they need to be held accountable, and you need full financial restitution so you can pull your life back together and the life of your son back together, because this is just completely outrageous. And a RICO case sounds like a great thing to do, because from what when I'm listening to your story, I just know that they're doing this with other parents in York County, right in your state. So getting together with the other moms and pulling all the cases together that would be the way to go, I would think.
Right. Yeah. Well, I will mention that they really pushed me as hard as they could against the wall. The opposition was not forgiving in any way. They were persistent and absolutely just as full on as they could have been in their opposition. They stalked me, they hid in my bushes, they forcefully entered my home. They, came to my house at 2:15 in the morning, and I opened my door. They had me at gunpoint, saying that they were monitoring my emails, and they really, really pushed me. They tried to push me over the edge, and it didn't work. So that said, I think that, they probably had to step up their game a little bit to push me over the edge, but they were happy to. And I think that any opposition that people encounter, causes them to, feel fear and not want to speak out about these injustices. So it's very difficult to find other moms who have been through similar situations because nobody is speaking up in this state.
Yeah, it's through fear that the system controls most people, and because of that, I want to commend you on the bravery you have and the courage that you have for telling us all about your case and speaking up and using your real name. You're incredibly brave for doing that. So, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Because, that was the other thing. It's the reason why I'm going after Child Protective Services, because it needs to be told. We need a trusted adult, period.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, for someone of my resources to, I spent over $100,000 in legal fees and different bureaucratic stuff that they put me through. And, they just can't give no options. If they're going to tell kids you have to speak up and you have to tell a trusted adult, then there needs to be one, because through this, what I've experienced, I can see that my child is not the only child who is a victim of this circumstance. And, what we find as protective mothers is that in 2016, this is a pandemic of white upper middle class men sexually abusing their own children.
Yes, and I've done some research into this and looked at all the statistics in academic research, and there are about 2 million protective mothers that have accumulated over the last 3 decades that are in our situation, and I'm hoping that policymakers and are listening to this show, because
right.
What you are going through, Jen, and what we are going through is I cannot describe it in any way else than terrorism. It's homegrown terrorism, and the system is enabling, participating, and enforcing terrorism on mothers and children, and it's got to stop.
Right. It's emotional terrorism.
Right. Let's take a little break, a little music break, and then after the break, let's bring in Susan, who has also gone through this, but we won't focus on her particular story. But let's bring in Susan then, and the three of us can talk about the causes of all of this, the federal funding that's involved in all of this, the money-making machine that this is all based on, basically, and what we can do as protective moms to try and change the system. So I'm going to put on our theme song, Pat Benatar, Hell is for Children, and we will be right back. And welcome back to Hell is for Children. And truly, if you've been listening to the last hour of this show, my goodness, Hell is for Children. If you are a little boy named Trey and you are placed with your father, who is a convicted murderer, and this is emotional for me. I'm just really heartbroken about the story. I think it's truly shocking. So I'm kind of, I'm having a hard time processing what has just been told to me. I can't even imagine what it's like to be Jen. So I'm going to bring her back on. Let me pull her off of mute. Jen, as you can hear, I'm just baffled about your story. It's truly shocking. So, I can't even imagine what you're going through.
Yeah. It's really, really, it's difficult. And as protective moms, I know for myself, people say, "Oh, you don't talk about your case or whatever," and I do that specifically because it's so heavy for people to hear and to understand, the ins and outs of it. I can barely, wrap my head around it myself. So for others to listen to it, I understand that there's a certain amount of weight and, responsibility involved with discussing topics like these. So I apologize for that. Really. It is truly
I meet so many protective mothers on Facebook, and I hear bits and pieces of the stories of everyone's stories, and I've known you for at least a year through Facebook, and I see you commenting everywhere, and such awesome things you have to say about the system and what's wrong with it and what we can do about it, and that's why I thought you'd be a great guest, but I didn't know the ins and outs of your story. And to hear it like this, to hear you tell it from beginning to end, it is mind-blowing, and it really, the name of our show is really appropriate. Hell is truly for children,
Yes,
and for you, for moms too. Hell is for moms. My goodness.
Right. I think it bears mentioning too that my older son he has really truly lost his life as well. He's lost his brother and, inadvertently his mom through all of this, and all of his plans and hopes and dreams and aspirations have been diverted to just, fighting by my side, and he has been an absolutely irreplaceable lifesaver. My older son, I certainly did not position him as, my protector and my confidant and my he's been by my side this whole time, and I give him enormous credit, and I truly just don't think that I would have made it without him, and unfortunately he has had to really give up everything and be dragged through this situation which he has no control over whatsoever.
It's so traumatizing for him too. I mean, the impact on his life must be enormous. There's no other way around this.
It is, and he was college-bound lacrosse when this came about, and I was coaching his lacrosse team, and we just had a very different life, and it got to the point where the abuser and his family were campaigning so strongly against me that I couldn't even go into a store and buy a cup of coffee without somebody, causing some type of a problem, which, to have problems yourself as a mother is one thing, but to have problems that affect your children are just, extremely difficult to endure. And
because you're also dealing with his trauma, and he's traumatized and feels probably responsible for how you are feeling, and then you have this burden to carry together while he's a child and you're the mom, and oh my God,
Yeah, and he videotaped all of the interactions with the police, and which proved to be quite noble achievements based on the pressure that was involved, and just the dynamics of the situation were really truly unbelievable.
He's very brave for doing that.
Yeah, he is. He's very, very brave. Unfortunately, it's not, particularly something that we, strive to build in our kids, is this type of resilience. I thought it was kind of appropriate for Child Protective Services to say that I was forcing my child to disbelieve in the system when nothing could be further from the truth.
Right. Yeah, unbelievable. Well, let's talk about the whole incentive about the way you were railroaded into this entire situation. And because, if I put my other hat back on, the hat of protective mom that sees all the stories fly by on Facebook, I see this pattern. What's happened to you is extreme, but unfortunately it's happening to literally millions of mothers in the United States. And like you, I started researching why this is happening, right? Any normal human being going through this is going to wonder, why is this happening? And why at this scale? And you and I have another friend in the Protective Mom scene, and her name is Susan Skipp. And she's had her own entire battle within Family Court and CPS. And we don't want to necessarily focus on her story today, but I want to bring her in. She's on hold right now. I want to bring her in and kind of have the three of us discuss and explain to the audience why all of this is happening, how it's all orchestrated within the system, and then maybe we can talk about what we as protective mothers can do to change the system. So welcome Susan Skipp to Hell is for Children. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi Gerda, hi Jen.
Hello.
Hi Susan.
Hi. I think Hell extended its invitation to every mom and everybody's extended family and everyone who loves the kid, the children and the mothers. So it just doesn't hit the children or the mother. It hits the environment.
Mhm. Yeah, I was just talking to my own mom about this today, and she said, Jasmine's cousin is really is upset about what's happened to Jasmine, and he can't sleep. He has sleeping problems as a result of this, and friends, her classmates are wondering where is Jasmine, what's going on, and how could this have happened? The impact is enormous, not just on us and on the siblings, but on society as a whole. I agree with you.
Well, in the U.S., most women are not aware that women really do not have any constitutional rights. And I'll let you just think about that in disbelief for a minute, but it's true. Every right that is preserved for women is not a constitutional right. Housing isn't constitutional. Pregnancy isn't a constitutional right. Borrowing money isn't a constitutional right. Funding for education is not a constitutional right. So truly, as a woman, you do not have the idea of equal protection and due process unless you are a criminal. Otherwise, you don't have any protection.
Mm-hmm.
As Jen said, you are supposed to have an attorney present. You have a right to an attorney, and she was denied an attorney. I've been denied an attorney. I have met a mom twice, actually. Met two mothers, one in Florida, one in Connecticut, whose custody change was brought on by a motion by the father for a dissolution of marriage, for a marriage that never happened. They were not even married. It was just a fast track to get them to the custody issue.
Wow. So all of this is unconstitutional, and it's tell us about the fact that there are no rights for women. Tell us about that. How can that even be?
Well, it's the truth. In 2011, Scalia, he passed away. Justice Scalia, whom I'm not a great fan of, but he explained in 2011, and people thought it was, just a funny rant, but it's actually the truth. He really explained why women have no constitutional rights. The Constitution provides for men, not for women. Sometimes it says people, like when in criminal proceedings, it says a person charged, but everywhere else it's men. And I know that may sound extreme, but it's true. The ERA was never passed in the 70s. It was never ratified. I'm sorry, and people just think societally that we have equal rights. We don't. The United States is one of the few countries that did not ratify CEDAW, the end of all forms of discrimination against women. along with Iran, Somalia, and Tonga, where the U.S. is ranked among those countries. And nor did the United States ratify the international rights of the child right there with Iran, Iraq, and Somalia and Tonga. And for the Commission to End All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, those the reason why it wasn't ratified by the United States, Iraq, Iran, Somalia, and Tonga, maybe that's changed a little bit, but we're up there with the same kind of world view, were for family issues. 23 for everybody, but Iran or Iraq has 24, and they were not interested in ratifying something that eliminated honor killings. So it's gonna sound, uncomfortable, but it's true. It's a fact. It's not even truth. It's a fact.
Right. Well, it's really important that the women who are listening and the men who are listening, that they are aware of this, because this is the root of the whole problem that we find ourselves in. Because when we start fighting for the rights of our children, there's no one out there and no treaty, no law to help us, right?
No, and not especially in the United States. If you have a child here in the States and you're not a resident of the United States, you're faced with the same problem. The United States does not recognize the UN CEDAW. So the United States won't cooperate with any human rights violations or discriminatory violations. In the U.S., if women had equal rights, in 1996, responsible fatherhood or fatherhood initiative funding would not have been made a law because it would have been recognized as discrimination. And it's still, here we are. This is why, one of the big reasons why we're having so many problems in the United States and in any country or state in the United States that has AFCC programming. That's the Association of Family and Conciliatory Courts. They're tied in with funding, federal funding from the fatherhood money that puts these programmings into Child Protective Services, DCF, Family Court. And also, what fathers don't realize is that this funding hurts good fathers too, and it's a brilliantly crafted misnomer that keeps women and men separated.
Right.
So tell us about this.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
For example, in my state of Connecticut, it's one of the smallest states in the United States and also one of the richest. But Connecticut gets almost $26 million a year from the federal government, and then the state of Connecticut matches those funding. So the little state of Connecticut has $47 million of fatherhood funding. By the Connecticut statutes, and you could take the same train of thought and apply it to your state or your country. Then what happens is just by the state statute, the fatherhood funding that comes in, that also goes to the Catholic Church, is turned into what's called in Connecticut Martinez Fatherhood Initiative grants. And the signatories of those grants are huge institutions that everyone is a part of. It's the judicial branch, the court support services, which is family relations, the Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Social Services, Department of Children and Families. So all of these huge institutions that victims or people being victimized would have to interact with on some level, the Department of Health, Department of Children and Family, Social Services, court support services, domestic violence services. These are all funded by the same money that is designed to injure victims. I don't know if I can clarify that more. Please ask me questions.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out, too, that a lot of the funding that would be potentially available to protective mothers or even victims is being funneled through the Office of Victims of Crimes and under the Violence Against Women Act, and it's controlled by the District Attorney's Office. So,
yes, that's one of the signatories. That's the court support services and the judicial branch, part of the signatories of those fatherhood funding grants. Domestic violence in Connecticut, 60% of domestic violence is funded through fatherhood grants, where it specifically states in access and visitation grant surveys that any counseling does not include sexual abuse, child abuse, substance abuse, neglect, abandonment. It only focuses on access. So they're already designed to circumvent any child safety laws. And most states in family court, the best interest of the child does not include health, safety, and psychological well-being.
I'm just baffled, you guys. Because I'm Dutch originally. I'm from the Netherlands. I lived in the United States for 25 years. I'm finding myself, involved in all of this now, and I just don't even know what to say when you are explaining this to me.
Well, it's really different. The United States is a very new country comparatively to the rest of the world, and I'm hearing kind of feedback. Do you guys have that or no?
Make sure that your computer is audio and your computer have it on. Make sure it's off. You can hear me on the phone. Just turn off the audio on your computer. That will stop the echo, hopefully.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I just shut my computer off, and I'm just on my phone now. Is that better?
If you still hear, let me know, and I will mute each one of you and switch it back and forth.
You're feedbacking.
I'm feedbacking. I'll let you guys talk. Go ahead.
Okay, Gerda. And I think it's also really important that women understand, or moms understand, or anybody that's entering this hell, that people are quiet about it. It's stigmatizing experience for women. When I started first trying to find out what the heck happened to me, I'm going into my 6th year of this hell. My children have not had a mother for 5 years, my younger children, and my older daughters are not allowed to talk to their sibling, nor is my stepdaughter allowed to talk with her younger sibling. So this is traumatic for everybody involved. And whenever I get talking about my own trauma, I lose train of my thoughts. So you have to throw me back on the train, because I don't know where I leave off if I start talking about my story.
Well, I think it's important to point out that the system is completely rigged against mothers and children.
Oh, it's perfectly running. It's the way it's set up. It's a generation of a long-term revenue stream. And if you look at the way it works, the factor that generates the income for all of these industries is abuse. And without abuse, there isn't a machine to feed. So sometimes there won't even be abuse, and they'll remove children through CPS, DCF. And they will always keep victim services involved to keep services involved. But really, there's not offering any solution or any solution to end what the children are subjected to, or the people that are victimized are subjected to. It's a continuation of victimization as a means to have a long-term revenue stream. It's brilliant, and cases are rolled up and traded on Wall Street. They're rolled up into bond funds, and the collateral is the federal backing, the federal incentives that will be returned for the services. It's astounding once you really get into it, and when you talk to people who have been, digging out the funding for years. Doreen Ludwig wrote a brilliant book called Motherless America, and it goes into pretty heavily in the United States how the funding works. So anybody questioning, wondering how this happens, that's a great resource, Motherless in America by Doreen Ludwig. I found that very helpful to kind of consolidate all these ideas that I couldn't put in a concrete, sequential way.
Right. It's amazing that we can even have the presence of mind to think through these things, and so effectively, from my perspective. It's people say, oh, well, there's agencies in place to protect.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the most staggering thing, is to have the agencies in place which are benefiting and are receiving the funding and are doing business as usual, but to have them and everyone under the perception that, well, there's agencies in place that would protect or prevent these things from happening, it further stigmatizes you, because to be enduring this with no outlet or no opportunity for relief is just unprecedented. And it can often be manipulated through mental health claims or
Well, that's the Department of Mental Health, Department of Public Health signs onto these signatories. That's why none of the problematic mental health providers that are instrumental and that are the middle people needed for the exchange and the cash out of the kids, whether it's in CPS or DCF or family courts, they are extraordinarily important because they provide the evidence. In order for any of these scams to work, these schemes, everyone involved, their ADA rights are violated. Their ADA, AA 2008 rights are violated. Their Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, those are all violated by the way that these are organized and well-running. And the DOJ is supposed to enforce these the ADA. That's an act of Congress, and its enforcement is issued to the Department of Justice. However, the Mondale Act, I just found out, I've been reading up on that, in the 70s took away the Department of Justice's supervision or enforcement of laws for the judicial branch. So it's like the head of the Hydra goes deep, deep, deep to the 30s, or actually further, because we are in a patriarchal society. The more rights women gained throughout the American course of its evolution, the more tighter the constraints became. Abortion was legal in 1823, and as women began to be able to hold money, get a divorce, work, be in charge of their lives, their ability to do things was constricted. So by 1950, it was illegal to have abortions, whereas 100 years prior, it was legal. And I'm not, bringing this up as an abortion issue, but I'm just bringing it up as a right to your own destiny. We have a right to fulfill our destiny, and it doesn't have to be a destiny determined by the laws. And I'm not making a pro-choice or anti-choice argument with that statement. I'm pro-choice
right.
person.
I think it's important also to point out that I don't think that anyone's unaffected by this. I think that the ramifications are so wide-reaching, it affects and overburdens almost every social and municipal agency around, because these are new and different situations that these agencies and services have to address and deal with. But I do believe that the legislators will be forced to deal with this situation.
If we vote for the right one.
Right. Well, there's that as well. But I can't imagine that anyone that's a human being who has heard stories like this, and I know that the legislators are inundated with these stories. In fact, as you know, Susan attended the hearing in Connecticut. I couldn't believe it. No one even knew the actual issue. None of the legislators or anything had any idea even what they were talking about.
Well, it's also important to know that task force meeting that you went to, that was comprised to address the issues of family court, was contrived of AFCC ringers. Like, they were all members of the AFCC. I mentioned that earlier. And the AFCC has been running up until 2013 illegally in Connecticut. Ann Stevenson, she used to write, or she's still an independent journalist, but she's a lawyer now. Ann wrote for Huffington Post, Community Digital News, Washington Times, I think, and she wrote extensively about Connecticut funding as well as Massachusetts funding, and wrote about the fatherhood grants that were given that made a way. For example, you mentioned the Joshua Komisarjevsky story earlier. Those were part of a brutal Cheshire murder. Joshua Komisarjevsky conceived a child of through rape from like a 13 or 14-year-old girl. He was known through Child Protection or DCF to be a known predator, a known sexual predator of children. This is all in transcript. While he was in jail, he was able to have funding pay for his daughter to visit him. When he got out of jail, he was able to have funded his place to live, attorneys to go to court, and actually went to court before Judge Barry Pincus, who gave Joshua Komisarjevsky custody of his, 4-year-old daughter, who was conceived by rape, to him, despite testimony from the parents that there's sexual abuse in the home and that there had been sexual abuse in the home, with Joshua Komisarjevsky living in a halfway house and an ankle bracelet. 4 months later, he went on to rape and murder the Pettit women of Cheshire, in Cheshire, Connecticut. That same judge, Barry Pincus, last year, it was probably international news as well, the baby Aiden, who went off the Argoni Bridge in Middletown, Connecticut. His father threw him off the bridge when he was 7 months old, and he lost his life because of it. Barry Pincus, who was a judge involved in that case as well, the mother went to court on an extension of a protective order. All of this involves domestic violence in all these cases, by the way, and this is a way to further domestic violence by proxy. So Aiden's mother, Adriana Toya, went to court on an extension of a protective order, and the Judge Barry Pincus denied the extension of a protective order and sent them to Family Relations to work on their custody issues. The custody issue, there was no custody issue before the judge. It was an extension of a protective order, not a custody issue. However, this judge ordered, the rooms are, 6 by 6, ordered this woman to sit with her abuser and her son's abuser in a small room with one other person and to work out custody issues. So there's no meaningful way that for any advocacy if the funding that is driving policy is the same funding that is supposed to be protecting people. Barry Pincus was involved in that case as well, and no one is looking at the fact that judges are not trained, that what judges do receive as training is by the AFCC and funding that is fatherhood funding backed, which is basically an abuser's lobby. And you have the perfect case in point. You have a violent offender. He's got custody of your son, and through nothing that you did besides stand up for your son and try to protect yourself and your son. And as soon as you try to protect yourself and your children, that's when they take your kids away and put them with the abuser and continue to abuse the protective parent.
Which I think flies in the face of the ex post de facto. It should not be considered a crime or a punishable offense to follow the law.
Well, you know what? Family court is not a constitutional court in the United States. It's a quasi-criminal, quasi-civil court. We either, by the way our government was set up, have criminal court and we have civil court. And somehow family court became some bastardized court to combine both. But if you look at the way our courts evolved, family court, that's where domestic violence is sent to. So it's kept out of criminal court. You know, child abuse, sexual abuse, that is DCF, CPS, goes to juvenile court, which is sealed. So all of these criminal acts are kept out of criminal court and kept out of the public eye. I mean, all the juvenile cases are sealed. Any kind of sexual abuse or child abuse that is, you know, extreme enough to somehow maybe get CPS or DCF involved, and they hardly are. And in Connecticut, 95% of kids in DCF are sexually trafficked. That's their own number, not my made-up statistic. And they're safer in whatever place they were in originally than they ever are in DCF care. And again, this is all the same funding that is backing all these policies. Policy is driven by money, and you have to take away the money to change the policy. We can't take out, you know, all these sick pedophiles and you know, criminals and abusers. They're just another one's going to pop in and fill in their place. We have to change the policy, and a way to change policy is cut off the funding or make it a bad business model for the policy to continue. And Gerda brought up lawsuits, RICO and civil suits. But most people in this position are ignorant of the law and by this point have exhausted all of their resources. You know, not everybody can write a federal suit. Not everybody can even write a federal complaint. Not everybody even knows what recourse they have or what due diligence they have to follow. So it's really, you know, the public, nobody believes these stories because people don't talk about them. And they're so incredible that they defy believability. Nobody could believe that a convicted murderer who sexually assaults his child has custody of that child. That just sounds like in the realm of, like, can't happen. But that's the reality, and that's
right.
What happens every day.
It's staggering, and, you know, it brings to mind to me, what message is that are we sending our kids? We're telling them.
Have you read Fast Food Nation ever? It's about, it kind of uses the idea of McDonald's, the corporate policy, and how they built themselves into a big corporation. And it kind of reminds me of the way that this whole, you know, scam works. As McDonald's actually created their ad campaign for longevity. They wanted to make it generational. So what they did was they set up studies to figure out what children dream about. So when those commercials came rolling out, they have those characters. And then their ads are multi-generational. So it's, you know, you got grandparents eating together, you have kids eating together, you have kids, it's a great treat. So, and because the kids are happy, the parents are programmed to think, oh, we'll take our kids to McDonald's. So it's a whole, like, social, psychological, you know, ad campaign. But Family Court and DCF, CPS are working the exact same way. They're creating a generational stream of normal. And it's just getting worse. It's like we know that that food is bad for us. We know it causes deaths. We know it causes health problems. But we're still eating it. They're still feeding it to us. So I don't know how, you know, the quick way to change that.
Well, one of the things that I'm thinking is we need to change the system. So who do we contact to present our cases? And one of the things I've been doing is creating a database of protective mothers on my website, www.freejasmijn.com, and that's spelled FREEJASMIJN.com. If you go there, you'll see a tab called Mommy Side, And I'm starting this database because, I want the public to know how many of us are affected, and not just the public, but the policymakers. So, what are your thoughts on who we can approach about changing, turning around this scam, eliminating this scam?
I think the first thing that has to happen is women have to have rights in this country. We have to have equal rights. Because if you look at, going down further and further, that is one of the roots of the problem. In 1978, there was legislation passed, 42 USC 242K. Like, I don't know how I remember some of this stuff, but just do. That required states to provide divorce certificates to the CDC. And the CDC data is used by HHS, so all of the data that HHS is basing this funding on, and the CDC bases their, health policy on, is faulty data, because all of this happens post-judgment in most cases where there was a marriage, and all of this happens, after the child was born and the mother's had custody. So it's the data that they're collecting for divorce and custody is completely inaccurate, because it doesn't reflect the changes, and all this takes place post-judgment, because there's a long-term revenue stream if you keep somebody involved the entire lifespan of the children. You don't just get a divorce and go away. When you have a way to keep people involved, and usually the way to keep people involved is there has to be a victim involved, and usually it's domestic and family violence. Those are the plentiful ripe victims who either, you set up in an adversarial position in proceeding in family court. You have an abuser and a victim. Who's going to win in an adversarial proceeding? Not the victim.
Right.
It's just the way it's set up, and the crimes are hidden in family court. Crimes are hidden in juvenile court because they're hidden to keep out of criminal court.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, maybe they should change the paradigm and get it more into criminal court, so at least the public defenders will start making more money. I don't know.
I think it's important to force accountability as well. I think that going after Child Protective Services is an effective means to get them to adhere to their practice and policies. They're so busy trafficking children and meeting their own funding, requirements, that they have completely dropped the ball on the child protection aspect of it. And then we're faced with the situation where who's protecting our children? And if no one is protecting them, which is the case, then we certainly can't have someone standing in the way saying that they are doing it when they're not, because people become complacent and believe
that's what I'm saying. It's like McDonald's normal. Like it's a multi-generational thing. If those children are protected, they grow up into be children who go along with the system and eat at McDonald's too.
Right.
Or, feed McDonald's. So it's really just to make suggestions, like we know what we could do. We could file this lawsuit. We could do this. We could hold these people accountable. The problem is victims don't know how to do these things. They're not aware of these things. I certainly never thought about any of this until I found myself in it. I would have thought this was the craziest lie, and we villainize other women very easily. That's part of our societal issue. It's so easy to, like, psycho ex-girlfriend. That's like a joke. You say psycho ex-boyfriend, people go, ooh,
Right.
So psycho ex-girlfriend is like a mainstream joke, but psycho ex-boyfriend is a scary movie.
Right.
So it's a cultural thing, too. And women easily vilify other women, and I'm sure, as you've known and if you had the experience, women in this process, in these industries, are far more damaging than the actual abuser men that we were stuck with in the beginning. They know how to run with this. They're even worse. I've had my worst experiences with women attorneys and women judges, and I've never had out of 8 attorneys any that has advocated for me or my children.
Right.
I had one tell me to shut up, and I said, please object. And he said, shut up.
Right, yeah.
And I've not been no lawyer has ever gotten me out of any situation, but gotten me worse off into a situation.
Right. That's a huge, huge wake-up call that I experienced, was to find out that the agencies in place, the departments in place, and the system in place was not only there to protect, but it was there to do the opposite.
Mm-hmm. And most women think that I'm going to trust my attorney, I'm going to trust my sis, I'm going to trust this and I'm going to do that, domestic violence, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Not realizing that it's a setup to use them and exploit exploit victimization.
Right.
There's no attorney that is. I've not met one protective mother who's had. Please let me meet one soon. But I've not had one protective mother who's had a lawyer really advocate for her or her children.
Right. And that's where we lose our constitutional rights.
We don't have any.
Right.
We don't have any.
Right.
That's the point. Like, that's one of the first pillars. Was we don't have rights. We have to accept that, as crazy as it sounds, because it's a fact. If it weren't a fact, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Right. Well, do we have to accept it, or can we change it?
Oh, we can change it. Of course we can change it. But somehow, in my generation, I grew up with big, ERA. I grew up in the 70s. Roe v. Wade was passed, and all these, stickers about equal rights, and my parents had a Volkswagen bus with bandanas and for curtains. So I grew up in this era where I just thought the ERA was passed. I had no idea. I thought we lived in this progressive society. We're a very young country. We've never had a female executive representative for our country. We do not have mythologies or legends or folklore in our culture, in our American culture, that has any women that are any kind of standout. They make, maybe they're good at sewing stuff, or they're good at, coming up with how to make a pail that doesn't have leaks, or they invented a dishwasher. But we really don't focus enough on women who have fought, even the women who have fought. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, for example, was an elitist and didn't think that votes should apply to black women. So we have to even understand, even the people that we do idolize, weren't really in it for us. They were in it for just them.
Mm.
And here I am villainizing women and just talking about how women villainize other women. But sorry about that.
Well, it's important to point out the truth. I think we can't, we have the unenviable position of having to speak the truth and bring the difficult truth to the public. And at one point, somebody mentioned to me something that I thought was a fantastic idea from a grassroots position, to go around to law schools and hand out flyers about the family law industry, because that's really where it all begins. And I came up with the idea of going around to the social service agencies and informing them about what they were truly doing, because if you even read the rhetoric, which sadly I have, that the DHHS access and visitation agencies tell their employees about what they think they're doing, what they're actually doing is so different, and they believe that they're helping, and they believe these stories that they're told about themselves, which the reality is they're selling out families for a dental plan and some illusion of security.
Well, I have to tell you that people on the line, most of the time the people that are on the line, whether it's in, any domestic violence, child protective services, the people that are directly interacting with the victims, that point-to-point contact, and and having been in that position myself, as one of the point-to-point contacts, it's not the line people that are the problem. It's their supervisors, and it's the policymakers, and it's the, do this and unquestionable authority kind of thing in thinking.
Right.
That is the problem. It's not that
Right.
a one-on-one point contact person for an agency is doing something wrong. They don't know how to do it right because they're only taught this certain way to fulfill this funding mandate.
Yep.
And they don't know.
They get a great benefits package. That's all I ever hear. Oh, it has great benefits. Well, chances are, if you're just a broken person, i.e. a social worker, and you're offered a $50,000 starting pay with stipends and full benefit, wouldn't that make you scratch your head and think to yourself,
if somebody who has a master's in social work probably has student loans, and comparatively for the level of education in years, it's not that much of a salary, really. Like,
right.
Somebody with a JD, a law degree, that's just one more year of school. Somebody with an MD, that's, 2 years, actually 2.5 years more schooling than a social worker. There's a big pay difference,
Right.
It sounds to me like we need to go to U.S. Congress with this story.
Yes, and hold Congress accountable for passing these discriminatory laws. But first, we need them to be recognized as discriminatory.
Right.
They're not going to be, we're lulled into this thinking, like Violence Against Women Act. It's only gender specific in the title. There's nothing in there that prevents men from accessing that funding, and they do, and accessing those services, and they do. And
so
what do
we do, you guys? Like, what do we do? We write up our situation, our collective situation, and we present it to who in Congress?
I don't really think people care truly. Our society, and I'm sorry, but our American society does not really care about victims of family and domestic violence by policy. Look at the way it is, because it's an income generator. So what we have to do is change the policy by changing the money, and by changing the money, you have to make it a bad business plan.
Right.
So. You're going to think twice about how you're going to have your business model if you're increasing your liability. So if your liability is, I'm going to get sued for violating someone's ADA rights, that's going to be a liability. So, you may not have constitutional rights as a woman, but as soon as the court recognizes you as, crazy or whatever, even if you're not, you are still protected under the ADA and ADA 2008. And I'm not a lawyer giving legal advice. I'm just being practical. Women do not have constitutional rights, but people with disabilities do. And there's no way that any of these things happen without disability laws broken. In every one of these cases, every single one, I don't care, you can maybe just throw anyone at me. I'll talk to any mother. I'll talk to any father. You throw them at me, and I will show you how a person's, including children's, disability rights are violated. Everyone is protected under the disability laws as soon as they are recognized disabled, as soon as someone says you're crazy or you're bizarre or you're this or you're that, because they don't know. It could be a symptom of whatever your disability is. So they can't really call attention to that stuff. It's think about it. The courtroom is a school. If you went into school and you were a student and all those insane things happened to you in a school, somebody would get sued fast. The whole school district would get sued. But here we have these institutions that are protected because of the funding and because of the ingrained in society and the institutions that are go all the way down to Washington and, or, channeled throughout our states with the same policies.
Yeah, I think to finish off the conversation, because we have about 6 minutes left, is to sue under that ADA, Americans with Disability Act. That's one way to do it, but I also think we need to really present this case to Congress with the 2 million of us, because if you say people don't care, yes, but there's 2 million of us, so we are strong, and there are all the other. Go ahead.
51% of our population in the United States or more is women. So we have over half of our population that doesn't have constitutional rights. I think, wake up. Wake up,
yes.
women.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. Great point. One of the things I've suggested on Facebook too is that we need a strike. We need a strike of this 50% of the population that is women. Let's all go on a global strike, because it's happening globally.
They've done that. Where did they do that? In what country they did that?
In Iceland, Finland.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it worked.
Yeah, you guys, I think that's the way to go. So let's kind of keep it at that and keep brainstorming in this direction. I really think our situation needs that level of revolution to really change what's going on. And I want to thank you both for participating and sharing your ideas. And Jen, thank you for telling your very difficult story. Very brave. So.
Yeah, I can't do that. It's really traumatic, even with traumatic waiting. I can't help but be affected by that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both.
Important.
Yes,
thanks,
it's very
Gerda.
important. So thank you both for being on, and hope to see you in future shows where we keep brainstorming about what we can do about this. So,
Okay,
all right, you guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gerda. Bye.
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 All right, and that concludes this episode of Hell is for Children. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope to have you on next week. Thanks, and bye-bye.